Hi, ladies and gents. This is Alexander Graham Markulides with Green Revolution again. I have the great opportunity to be with Ryan Martens. Thank you so much for taking your time to be with us, sir. And I think you can describe what you do better than I do, so I'm going to let you go ahead and do it.
Rock and roll. Thank you, Alex. So, I myself am involved in a subject called environmental planning and design, which involves the aspects of urban systems, population, and ecology. So how can we create a world that is not destructive, not conquering, but living in a harmony with the environment as we build and develop our ecosystem as humans?
Wonderful, wonderful. And that we're talking cradle to cradle paradigm. We're talking living buildings. We're talking about a mainstream Republican, Independent, Democratic, Federalist, whatever kind of political party you're affiliated with, the Green Party. This is for you. Mm-hmm. This is the creation of houses and infrastructure that might take in consideration, I don't know, where the sun rises, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, to place the house in an appropriate area to maximize that solar input for solar panels or for natural light.
Right. So it's all about mimicking the ecosystem, right? So realizing what the ecosystem has done for itself and then ultimately for us. So all the gifts and abundance and the resources of the ecosystem are readily available for us to use responsibly. The destructiveness happens when we pillage them and we're not as intelligent to understand how they work holistically. So in urban infrastructure, like Alex alluded to, what I work a lot with are living buildings, right? Buildings that are made out of organic materials, buildings that are made out of natural materials or recycled materials. So we're using materials that we already have, are overabundant, that we don't need to synthesize and create and are not damaging to the environment, and we're building buildings out of that material, right?
Phenomenal. Can you give us some specifics about what those materials look like to the average person so they can say, that would be an example of this?
So a great building method that I personally endorse is called straw bale building.
Straw bale building.
Straw bale building.
Okay.
So you can look it up. They do it in pretty much every state. New Jersey, not so much because of certain building codes. We're starting to progress towards this, but it's huge in California, Washington State, Seattle. They do a lot of it in New York State actually as well. So what they do is they take straw, which is actually a byproduct of the agricultural industry. So you might think that animals eat straw.
Right.
Animals actually eat hay. So hay is actually full, right? So hay is the stalk of plants like alfalfa and other plants, right? It's the stalk of that. Animals eat that, where straw is the stalk of wheat. You cannot eat it. It's hollow, it's hard, it's not tasty to animals. So until this point, it has just been really thrown out, misused. No one's had a purpose for it. They found out that it has really good insulation value. So what you do is you build your house, the structural component of it, out of timbers, so out of wood. So this is a building practice best for those places that have access to a lot of lumber and a lot of wood. You build this structure out of wood, and then you fill the structure with straw bale. So that acts as your walls and your insulation. So once you have that, you then cover the walls and the insulation with a lime-based and earth-based plaster. So it's clays, things that you can just extract right from the earth. So we could go over here, dig some soil up, create some soil, put some straw in it, put some water in it, and we make this thing called Adobe Plaster.
Adobe Plaster.
Adobe Plaster. And we can plaster that all over the walls. It's a natural earth-based plaster, can decompose right back into the earth when you want it to, and it will last a very long time in your walls, gives a beautiful finish. Straw bale structures, you can look up online, you can see pictures of them. They're very magnificent buildings.
And we're talking literally cradle to cradle.
Yeah.
You no longer need that wall, that building, and it returns beautifully back into the environment.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about objections, right? I sell solar panels part-time sometimes, and what are the objections you hear? They don't look good. How much is it going to cost to wait on my roof? And I have to have good, answers for those objections. So one thing I think of is, okay, straw. Isn't it going to rot in my wall?
Correct. So that's a common objection to straw bale. The thing with straw is when it's not exposed to an excess amount of oxygen and an excess amount of outside environmental factors like sunlight and water, it takes a very long time to decompose.
Okay.
So it could take up to 200 years for the straw to actually decompose when it's covered by plasters. 200
years. Meanwhile, we have most of our buildings, bridges, and infrastructure made out of concrete with rebar, and rebar starts to rust within 50, making these what seems to be really strong buildings actually pretty, I don't want to say weak, but pretty short-lived in the long term.
Right, you have to repair them.
Interesting. Wow, so 200 plus years, straw bale building?
Yeah, straw bale building.
Straw bale building. A tongue twister and a wonderful way to, a wonderful way to build your house or any sort of structure. Awesome. All right, we're going to take a tour down here, and as we look at the crops, we're going to go to a structure, and we're going to talk about the differences between the structure we're about to see, which is a hoop house or a greenhouse for our viewers, and what kind of building structures you would be able to build or do build, and why they are so much more beneficial in all regard. As we're doing this, I come to think about the Willow School, a phenomenal school in Pottersville, New Jersey. No, Gladstone, New Jersey, sorry. And they have, like you were mentioned, they reuse things, and they reuse everything. They have a living building, which is the Living Building Challenge that I'm sure you've heard of.
Yep.
And in their walls, Ryan, they have jeans, like chopped up recycled jeans as insulation.
Denim insulation.
Denim insulation. So that just rang a bell, and I think that that's an example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it is. So that's an example of something that would have been in a landfill, right?
Mm-hmm.
So an old pair of jeans, who's using those, other types of denim that are commonly just thrown out after their first use, and someone's taken that and then put them in the walls of the building because they act as a very good component for insulation. And then outside of their insulation value, you also just recycle the material, and you're not taking more components from the earth, and the material is naturally degradable. So that material, when you're done using it, it can digest right back into the earth system without many problems.
Love it. And the current things we use do not do that.
No.
Lumber treated wood, concrete, asphalt. Talk to us about how those things do eventually return, but in a much more laborious and non-eco-friendly way.
Right. So since we've been talking a lot about straw bale, and we were just brought up denim as insulation properties, I'll talk to you guys about what other insulations look like today. There's a couple popular ones, which are spray foam, and then fiberglass insulation. So fiberglass insulation, y'all may have worked with it before. If your grandfather told you to take some insulation out of your attic and you get all itchy and all the glasses in your skin. It's a terrible, terrible material, right? It's terrible to work with. It's really not, it's not healthy to be breathing in. It's not healthy to get on your skin. It also takes a very long time to decompose in the earth. It's not necessarily healthy for the earth. It's very chemically synthesized. And its insulation value is actually less of the other examples we've talked about today. Wow. So denim and straw bale insulation actually have a higher insulation value than would fiberglass insulation. So that's an example of what we use and why it's not necessarily that good. It's mass produced. It is not healthy to be digested into the earth system, and it's not healthy for us to be interacting.
And I just want to repeat that because I love to repeat the important points. We're talking about spray foam and this kind of insulation that can be very itchy. It is literally nowhere near as effective to insulate, takes a long time to biodegrade, and this fiberglass insulation can be toxic. So I think that's important to know. Because I think that people think, oh, the current buildings are up to code. This is the best possible material produced in the mass monocrop American way or 21st century way. No. It's not necessarily the case. This insulation isn't as effective as straw bale or jeans, recycled jeans, and we still are using it. It's lasting nowhere near as long, not effective, and it's polluting the environment.
In this country, we do a lot of things by tradition, which isn't necessarily always a bad thing, but sometimes that happens to give us these roadblocks, right? So fiberglass insulation exists because we used it when we didn't know its negative factors, and we didn't know that there's other alternatives that worked way better than these insulation bodies.
Right.
But since we've been so engrossed in using it, it's now very common. So it's hard for us to kind of expand and get away from using fiberglass, even though it's not necessarily the most practical, the most economical, or the most environmentally friendly. So all these factors. Also, building codes are not really meant to support environmental reasons and human health reasons. They're meant to support an economic system and like I said, a traditional system. So when we talk about new buildings and how we can start changing the gamut and changing the wave and create building material that will be natural, that will help our ecosystem, that will help us, because it's all a part of it. It doesn't only help the ecosystem, it helps us as well. So when we start talking about these building materials, we have to understand that this is against, in some ways, the tradition, and it takes a long time for these things to progress. But as we work towards them, we can make them cheaper, we can make them more efficient, and then we can have an economical, social, environmental solution all in one with these materials.
Love it. And before we go for this quick tour to the greenhouse, can you explain to our viewers, for those of you them that do not know, where does fiberglass even come from? Where does this fiberglass insulation come from? How is it created?
I actually am not sure where fiberglass comes from. I'm not sure, but I would assume that it is glass fibers, miniature
Right.
glass fibers
Right.
that are kind of extracted and then put into some type of synthetic material. Because if you look at fiberglass insulation, it's very like cottony.
You're right.
In
Pink
some
cotton
senses,
often,
that
right.
pink cotton, exactly. So I'm assuming that pink cotton is some type of synthetic fiber, and then the glass, those fibers of glass, those small shards of glass, are then somehow extracted and then put into the insulation.
With the hope that glass, maybe its specific heat or heat capacity, would retain heat longer and therefore allow the heat to stay in the building or something like that.
Right. Well, insulation actually works off the concept of air pockets. So
Uh-huh.
the more air pockets you have, the more insulating the material is, because the air does not move through it. It gets trapped in the air pockets.
Ah.
So if you're heating a building and your heat starts to go through your walls, with insulation in the walls, that heat starts to get caught in the miniature air pockets, and then it no longer can move through as quickly through the wall.
And therefore, the hot air, which is where the heat has been dispersed at this point in time, stays within the home of the building.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
Yes.
All right. So let's go ahead take a tour in here. And by the way, for those of you who recognize the place, the land we're on, we're at
Mevo Fresh Roots Farm.
That's right, Mevo Fresh Roots Farm in Mahwah, New Jersey. Phenomenal job. All the crops are really popping at this point, and we'll take a tour through that in a minute. So let's take a look at this building, and just off the top of your head, just looking at it, what are the things that represent your traditional tried and true methodologies, and how would you, as a green builder, improve them to make it exactly that, a green building that is increasing the profits of the people building it, reducing the cost of the people living in it, and of course improving our health, which reduce our costs as well for healthcare.
Right. So the first thing I can think of is, this is a greenhouse, so it's not traditionally built as most houses are, but it still uses a lot of similar materials. So if we look at this material right here, this is a caulking material for weatherization. It helps water not leak into the building. Right? Which is a good thing. Unfortunately, these chemicals are all made by Dow Chemical, right? For the most part, they're very toxic. Most of the chemical containers have warnings on them, warning labels on them, telling you that they're known to cause cancer, and they're very cancerous and very toxic to the body, or to be ingested, or to be in the environment. It's toxic for the environment as well. So a solution to this would be, as we talked about, Adobe Plaster, clay plaster, Hempcrete. All these things can bond into small seams like this. They're natural, right? And they still weatherize, so they keep water out, okay? And that would be a solution for something such as caulking or weatherization stripping, as we see there.
Great. And the last thing you mentioned was
Hempcrete.
hempcrete.
Right. So hempcrete is traditionally used. They use it a lot in Europe. It's traditionally used, again, just like as straw bale would, if you could recall our straw bale conversation, as the insulation component, as an interior wall in buildings. So they kind of timber frame a building out, and then they actually pour hempcrete inside these buildings. So that would seal all these. You know, if this was a pure hempcrete wall right here, there would not be a seam here. And as we would extrude this fan out, we could then bring the hempcrete right up to the fan, right? And fill in this seam. So there wouldn't be that space, because hempcrete is a malleable material, and you can shape it. Whereas this plastic, you cannot. So you can't bring the plastic right up onto that fan. So you need to use this weather.
And the life of this toxic Dow chemical caulk compared to hempcrete or the Adobe Plaster, we're talking, what are the ballpark lengths of time? Or are they just straight up comparable, or is the eco-friendly better?
This will be around for a very long time. This will not decompose or degrade for I don't know how long, thousands of years probably.
Yeah,
Very long time this will be in the Earth system. But you'll have to reapply this caulking probably in about 15 years or so.
Okay.
Whereas hempcrete or clay plaster, you would have to reapply a little more. You'd have to be a little more careful and kind of be on top of it. But again, I mean, that's a part of being more in touch with the ecosystem, right? There's work that's required, and if it's only every couple of years I have to go out there and repatch a little bit of Adobe Plaster or a little bit of hempcrete, I mean, for me, that's a small cost to pay as to using a caulking material that could potentially be a hazard to the environment and to its surroundings.
I love it, and I think about the words you use, Earth system, right? I mean, just the kind of terminology you use sort of paints the picture of the way you see the world, and I love it. Yeah, great. All right, let's go on inside. Let's see what's going on in here. Okay. And so this is impressive that they have a hoop house. They're going to extend their growing season. If you're interested in crops, Mevo does a very, very, very fair and low cost community service, CSA, community supported agriculture. Thank you. And this is one of the reasons they can do this more long term. And I just want to take a look at all the structures we have in here, Ryan. And if you could speak to any structures you see that can be replaced by. Are we just saying green building, or is there a more specific technical term?
Green building, environmental building, and then natural building. These are all terms that you would see as a broad outline. Environmental planning, outline of kind of urban infrastructure and ecosystem services kind of mashed together.
Okay.
And then as we go into more specifics like straw bale and rammed earth, which I may talk a little bit about, those are more technical terms within the industry. But we'll get you very far if you start looking up those things online and start researching.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just an example of what these guys did really great. We're gonna, as I've been dissecting this building a little bit, I've kind of been spreading a little bit of negativity. And I don't mean to do that at all towards Mevo. They're a great organization and they worked really hard to create this greenhouse and is doing some really good things for them. So I want to point out something that they did really great right here. If you can check this out, these are all pallets, right? Reused lumber. So when they can be green, they do as much as they possibly can. Unfortunately, they couldn't use concepts of Hempcrete and Adobe Plaster here with this greenhouse just because of some issues with the town. If they wanted to do that, they could have, but it would have taken them some years to actually go through the application process to be able to build a more alternative material and style building, which is what we were talking about before. Sometimes when you look to these progressive options, it takes some time.
Right.
And unfortunately, they, like Alex said, they have a CSA this year. They're trying to produce vegetables. That is their goal, and they need to, they need to compromise in some senses. So,
right, and to speak that, I mean, you have to sort of, enter the system and change it from within. Right. So you deal with what the current, paradigm of thinking is. You make, you live in your current house. You drive I drive a Honda Civic, right? 2016, love it, great, but it's an i4 turbo and it burns gasoline, And so I'll get to that point too, where hopefully I'm. Riding my bike to work, or doing a biodiesel or something better. So, or even an electric that has, energy that comes from not, burning coal, but solar panels. Right. So I hear you, and thanks for saying that.
Yeah, they're all small changes, and they take time to work on. Like Alex said, we both drove gasoline cars here, and it's we slowly but surely pick apart every part of our lives and try to make it more environmental and try to make it more in harmony with the ecosystem. So it's an ongoing process.
And it's just what you said, Ryan.